On May 4th, 1929, in Brussels, Belgium, a star was born. Her name was Audrey Kathleen Rustin, the child of Joseph Victor Anthony Rustin, an Anglo-Irish baker and importer, and Ella van Heemstra, a baroness whose family had ties to the Dutch throne.
When World War II broke out, Hepburn was sent to Holland. One of her half-brothers went into a forced labor camp and the other went into a German army. During the war, Hepburn took dancing lessons at the Arnhem Conservatory of Music and gave performances in people's basements to raise money for the Dutch resistance. She also carried messages in her shoes to resistance leaders. She and her mom survived off of tulip bulbs and grass pies until the war ended.
Relief came when the war ended a day after Hepburn's 16th birthday, a moment that would change her life forever.
Hepburn was considered too tall at 5'7" and took whatever acting roles she could find. A man named Cecil Landau took interest in her looks, however, and cast her in 2 of his shows. She worked her way up to being a lead in the show Gigi, where she received rave reviews.
Her first movie role was in Roman Holiday, where she played a princess. The film was a huge hit, and Hepburn received an Academy Award for Best Actress for her first major dramatic role. Screw those jerks that called her too tall.
Her first son, Sean, was born September 17, 1960, in Lucerne, Switzerland. His father was her husband, Mel Ferrer, a man who had been in many movies with her.
Her most famous role in 1961 in Breakfast at Tiffany's was a role that made Hepburn impossible to ignore. She set a standard for sophistication. She rarely did interviews, which made her fans even more interested.
She played in many other movies and eventually divorced Mel Ferrer. A month later, she married Audrey, and they had a son named Luca on February 8, 1970. After her second son was born, Audrey Hepburn took time off to raise her family in Switzerland and only took movie roles that she wanted.
She divorced Andrea in 1982. She took 2 small roles and from then on dedicated her life to humanitarian work.
Hepburn began traveling the world on behalf of the United Nations Children's Fund, speaking out for children in need and drawing attention to the plight of third world families racked by war, famine, and disease. As a Goodwill ambassador, she made hundreds of speeches, raising millions of relief dollars. Her last trip to drought-stricken Somalia in September 1992 publicized international famine relief efforts. Her impassioned plea for collective responsibility earned her the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1992 from President George H.W. Bush and the John Herschel Humanitarian Award.
She did amazing work, such as visiting a polio vaccine project in Turkey, training programs for women in Venezuela, projects for children living and working on the street in Ecuador, projects to provide drinking water in Guatemala and Honduras, and radio literacy projects in El Salvador. She saw schools in Bangladesh, projects for impoverished children in Thailand, nutrition projects in Vietnam, and camps for displaced children in Sudan.
Coming from a house ravaged by war, Hepburn understood the impact that support can have. Her family survived off of rations and the generosity of others. In her last years on this earth, Hepburn did all she could to help the people who could not be helped by anyone else. She was the face of optimism for the underprivileged.
Hepburn died at the age of 63 from colon cancer. At the height of her career, she had starred in only 16 films in 13 years, but their impact was so stunning that she set a standard for substance and style that women have imitated ever since. Her humanitarian work benefited so many people. Audrey Hepburn built herself up from a post-war refugee to the most iconic figure in film, using her determination and kind heart.